Thank you. Okay. Ugh. Okay, in a minute, Shirley, we'll hand it over to Shirley. But first, I just want to call your attention to the rules. We have the same rules for the conferees that we had last year, and the same rules also just for the members. And I don't think we got you copies of the rules. They're the same. So would you like them? Would y'all like a copy next time, or you want to? Okay, so John will send everyone a copy, and you can just look over them and see if you have any questions, but there's no surprises. It's pretty much just how we did things last year. Any questions about that? Anyone? Okay. Okay, so I really have a goal this year of understanding more and more of what we're doing, all of us, the whole budget process. And I think Shirley is going to help us with that. And then I also want y'all to know that when we have the universities come to us to give their report, it's going to be a little bit more in depth, and we're going to have longer for each university. I've requested 1 day for each school, and we'll see. I think that's what the plan is. And so I would like you all to let me know if there's any specific questions that we want to make sure. We want them to know ahead of time what we're going to be asking them, what we would like for them to tell us. And so if you have anything that we want to just put across the board, all of them, we want to know these things, will you let me know? And then we will pass that on to all the universities. So it's a little loud.
Or very small one.
It's turned down just a little bit. So, okay, let me know about that. And then otherwise, we're going to jump right in. I hope you all will give Shirley your attention and ask her questions. Is it okay if we stop you in the middle for clarification? Okay. Okay, so Shirley's going to jump right in. Please ask questions. Yes. Oh, yes, we have new staff, and you're here in person. We love it. Yes, I think we'll do everyone. Why doesn't staff go first, and then I'll sit back. Why don't we'll do staff first, and then we'll have the representatives. So, yes, love that. Please introduce yourselves. Maybe tell us how long you've been working in the Capitol. And one interesting thing about you, sorry, I know people hate that, but just something about you personally.
Excuse me, good afternoon. My name is Jill Walters. I have worked for the Revisor of Statutes office for 37 years. And charmingly, someone in my office this year said to me, "What year did you start working here?" And I said, 86. And she looked at me and she said, "I was born in 87. To which I just smiled politely under my mask. So I started out in Ag Committee and Judiciary Committee, and I staffed Judiciary Committee for 20 years, and then they needed somebody to move into budget when other people were retiring. So in 06, I started on the Senate side, and then in 11, I started on the House side of doing budgets. So I've been doing budgets for that amount of time, but actually been here. This is my 37th session. And one thing's interesting about me is I have 2 daughters who are in college. One is a junior at Kansas Wesleyan University in Salina, and the other daughter, sadly, has left the state, and she is going to the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond. But I hope to get her back someday.
Thank you. And we are so fortunate to have Jill. I'll just say, we really appreciate you being here with us.
Well, thank you. And I just might briefly remind you, like if you have questions about bills that are assigned to the committee or have a bill draft and you need me to help you work on that, I would be glad to do that for you. And then if you have floor amendments, that's what our office will take care of those for you too. So thank you. I look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, next.
Good Good afternoon, committee. My name is Gabrielle. This is my second session with legislative research. I was in general government budgets last session, and I am taking over K-12 education. So I will present the state library to your committee. Something interesting about me, I'm born and raised in Kansas, and I went to K-State.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, committee. My name's Shirley Morrow. I've had the higher education budgets for 10 years now. I've been with the legislature 12 years. Something interesting, I don't know, I'm not very interesting. Oh, yes, I will be wearing my bling when I present the agency budgets. So stay tuned.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, hello. I'm John Gaunt. I'm the committee assistant. I've been with the legislature for 3 years. This is my second year as committee assistant. And I'm retired KBI, 40 years there at the KBI.
And believe me, he notices everything.
Sorry, my name is Dennis Nicholson. I'm on the AV team. Something interesting about me, I'm originally from Connecticut, and I am off of school from KU. I will be going back in the fall, but I am getting my master's in church music.
And is this your first session to be working here in the Capitol? Yeah, yes. Great. Well, welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Irshad Radar. I work with the AV team, and I'm principal software engineer. I just relocated from Emporia State University. I'm a PhD student at Emporia University, and this is my first job with Kansas Legislature. I worked with Dell Technologies as a principal software engineer previously. Thank you.
Can you tell us how to spell your first name?
My name is Irshad Radar.
Ishad, and how do we spell that?
IRSHAD.
Okay, thank you. Great, welcome. Okay, are we ready, Shirley? You ready to jump right in? Okay, all right. Thank you. Wait, sorry, I have to introduce let the representatives introduce themselves. Brett, we'll start with you.
I'm Representative Brett Fairchild. This is my first term, second year. I represent the 113th District.
What's your hobby?
I'm a farmer. I guess that's what's interesting about me.
Yeah, very. Okay, Representative Wynn's not with us. Representative Rogers is out of town.
Hi, everyone. Representative Brandon Woodard from District 30 in Lenexa and Olathe. It's my fourth year in the legislature and fourth year on higher ed budget. Let's see, interesting. Since we were last here, I was on about 62 flights, traveling about 49,000 miles across the country and around the world.
Wow, frequent flyer miles, huh? For personal later, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I'm Susan Humphreys, y'all know, from the Wichita area, District 99, Wichita and Andover. And we have 4 children and 2 in-law children and 2 grandchildren. We finally all got back together after not being all together for a long time, but we were all together New Year's, and I was very thankful.
I'm Barb Wassinger. I represent the 111th District, which is in Fort Hays State Territory, Hays and Victoria. I became a Kansan 35 years ago. I was a native of New York and grew up in the Chicago area. Is that interesting?
Phil Riley, I represent the 80th District, which is basically south of Wichita, Wellington, Ark City, Caldwell. And we have 3 boys. The oldest one is retired Navy. He is in Phoenix, Arizona. The second was in the Navy and now he's out, works as a programmer for one of the military people out there. And he has our 4 granddaughters. And then we have a young Wichita son, and he's working at one of the children's home there in Wichita.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mike Amix, I represent the 45th District, which is Western Douglas County, Western City of Lawrence. I represent the territorial capital of the state of Kansas, which is Lecompton, Kansas. Quite a large district, but my wife and I have one son. He lives in Pratt, Kansas, and he is through the college experience and Dad's done paying. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jesse Burris, Representative, House District 82, Mulvane, part of Derby, which is south of Wichita. My wife and I have 4 kids.
And the oldest is 6? She's 6? He's a busy dad, let's say. Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you all for being here, everyone else. Is there anything else I've forgotten, anybody? Okay. Okay, Shirley, all to you.
Oh. Sorry, I should have passed those out earlier. Okay, one of the things the chair and I discussed before session started, and I can take this off, was to provide you with as much information as I can for you to make a more informed decision when you're looking at the budgets. I know last year it was a little frustrating, and I don't want that to happen again this year. So one of the things we talked about was to maybe go over the different documents that KLRD produces that explain the budget, explain the changes that the legislature makes throughout the process, so that you're more familiar with all the documents we pass out to you during the budget process. And then the one thing we really never do, which is a little interesting, is we never talk to you about the actual budget document, and we never go through it. So I'm actually going to do that today. And one of the things we want to let you know is this is just the first presentation and it's an introductory presentation. And what we want to hear from the committee is what additional questions you have, what additional information do you need in the next 3 weeks before we start budget presentations, so that, again, you can make a more informed decision when you start amending the budget. So the first thing I'll talk about, you have a blue document in front of you. This is a document that KLRD produced. This morning was the first time I saw this document. It wasn't produced by me, but in essence, and it's in kind of alphabetical order, it introduces you with a definition and a picture of all the different documents we provide at KLRD throughout the budget process. So whether it's the budget analysis, which will be the first document we look at starting in February, or the very last document, which is the bill explainer when you're doing your final voting on the floor. This kind of just shows you, gives you a definition and a picture of what all those documents are. The yellow sheet is pretty much the same documents, but it's in the chronological order of the session. So it starts out, we start looking at budgets in October when the agencies submit their budgets to Division of the Budget and put their numbers in the IBAR system, which is our accounting system. So we do what we call left side, which is the agency's budget, and then we get the governor's recommendation, which we call the right side, and we put those together into the budget analysis. So that's the first document that you look at. Now we will provide you with a budget analysis document before we start budgets so that we can walk through it. And I'm going to tell you, because one of the things we did is we changed it drastically. We moved lots of things around. We made it much more colorful. There's line graphs, there's bar charts, a lot less text. So I'm going to have to introduce you to that document and explain what's in it before we actually start going through those budgets. So we'll do that probably maybe the last week of January before we start budget analysis, before we start going through the budgets. From that, you will make recommendations. We will put those in a subcommittee report, and that's the next document. You don't technically see the subcommittee report, but it will contain your recommendations or your amendments to the budget, and your chair will present those to the full committee of House Appropriations. And then House Appropriations takes it from there, makes additional changes, and then it goes to conference committee, and then we put bill packages together. And again, depending on how leadership wants to do the budgets every year, it's always different. Keeps us on our toes, whether we'll have a bill before the break or we'll have one bill after the break, whether we have omnibus, whether we don't. We'll figure that all out later on. But this gives you an idea of all the different documents and what's in them as we go through the process.
Shirley, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
So on the subcommittee reports, and it says records all changes made by legislative action, and that's legislative, that's the committee action.
No, that is every change made through the entire process. And if you would like, I can bring in the subcommittee reports from last year so you can remember what happened to the budgets last year. We will start at the very first, the table and the very first paragraphs are what the agency requested, then what the governor recommended, and then your changes are the first changes or recommendations, then House Appropriations recommendations, whether there's floor action or not, there may or may not be. Then we will combine them, and there will be Senate Ways and Means recommendations, Senate floor action, conference committee, and then the final changes that are made that go into the bill. So it's the entire session, everybody's changes.
Okay, and then is there some reason you say left side and right side?
Left side is the agency, right side is the governor's recommendation.
When you're looking at the paper.
When you're looking at the tables,
yeah,
the columns on the left are the agency numbers, the columns on the right are the governor's recommendation.
Okay.
We don't get real complicated. It's just.
Yeah, just, okay, that makes sense. Okay, anyone else have any questions so far? Okay, yes, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I know the answer, but just for clarification, could you explain again the word omnibus?
Omnibus happens after, during the break in April, we do the consensus revenue estimates in April. And so that's when the numbers are adjusted of what we think the revenues are going to come in at. And then we will do an omnibus memo at that time. It does a couple of things. It will adjust like the caseloads and the different numbers per the consensus revenue estimates. We will go through every bill that has at least passed one chamber and we believe will pass out of the legislature, and we will put in the omnibus memo all of the fiscal effects of those bills, or whether if they don't have a fiscal effect, then they don't go in. But we'll say, we believe you're going to pass SB 32. The agency believes they need $1 million in order to do whatever that policy is, and then the legislature decides, do we fund it or do we not fund it? I'm trying to think of some of the other things. That is also the time there may be GBAs. If the governor has some additional funding that she wants to do, and almost always it will also contain the caseloads.
GBA's the
Governor's budget amendments. Thank you. So it's a very thick document. The House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means will come in 1 or 2 days before the legislature gets back from the break, and we will present that omnibus memo to each of those. And then again, that might roll into the current mega bill. It might be a separate bill. Leadership makes those decisions.
Shirley, as a side note, can you explain what happened when we left in March of 20 and we didn't have an omnibus bill? How did that work out?
I'm trying to remember. That was so long.
Yeah, it was, it was March of 20 when everyone was rushing home and we didn't come back to do omnibus.
Well, you did come back. There was a bill.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember because I was actually out then for medical issues. I did not come back. Jill might remember because I wasn't here then either.
Jill, if you could enlighten us, thank you.
Yeah, in March, you passed a bill for the next fiscal year. And so what leadership and everyone determined is that that bill would get the agencies through the budget, and then any shortfalls or issues that came up, you would address then in the next session, which you would have done this past January.
Yeah, there always has to be a mega bill because that is the entire budget for each agency. So you have to have something for them to operate that next year.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any questions on any of that? Okay, you have in front of you a legal size document, and I made it legal size so you can read it a little easier than not. This is just a portion of actually 3 different bills. There is a supplemental bill, and a supplemental bill supplements last year's mega bill. So this year, the supplemental bill will be for fiscal year 2022, because we're currently in fiscal year 2022, but we can still change it. So there'll be a supplemental bill, and it will reference last year's mega bill, and I'm going to show you what that looks like when we get to one of these sections. But it is primarily for the current year, and which is fiscal year 2022. The mega bill will be the entire budget for each of the agencies for fiscal year 2023. That's what you will get once those come out. What I'm going to show you is last year's final bill with everything combined. Because what I'm going to show you is, here's what was in the GovRec, here are some of the amendments were made, and here's how they look in the bill once they're made. So since this agency does higher education, and higher education is all together in one section of the bill, I'm providing you with pages 112 through 140, which is all the higher education agencies. And I'm going to go through them, and I'm not going to talk in detail on every one or everything, but you'll notice I've got a few highlighted areas where I'll kind of show you this is how this is done and this is how this is done. I also have the capital improvement sections of the bill, which start on page 196, because capital improvements are all in a separate section of the bill. They're in the same bill, but they're usually toward the back. and I'll show you what the capital improvement sections look like. And then the very last page is actually the Omnibus Bill from last year for higher education, and it's just those 2 pages. So higher education actually starts at the very bottom of page 112. You'll see section 100. It's Fort Hays State University. The section that's prior to that is the Historical Society. So when you see those different funds, they look a little like the Historical Society, and that's why. So each agency has its own section. The sections are broken into subsections. If an agency has state general funds, that is always in subsection A. So you'll notice the very first sentence under subsection A says there is appropriated for the above agency from state general funds. So everything in subsection A is going to be a fund that contains state general funds. You'll notice there we start with official hospitality, or I'm sorry, official operating expenditures, including official hospitality. Not every state general fund has official hospitality, but there will be a sub-account within the operating so that in IBARs they can account for what is specifically spent on official hospitality.
Shirley, so IBAR.
IBARs is the state's accounting system. I meant to look it up this morning because somebody asked me what IBARS stands for, and I am very sorry I did not get that done, but I will look it up.
Okay, and then what is official hospitality?
I was ready for that one.
Good.
Official hospitality expenditures are paid from funds as appropriated and designed. They include food, lodging, transportation, official gifts, favors, official entertainment, meals provided to state employees under certain circumstances, or directly related to miscellaneous expenses provided to official guests or provided for an official function as approved by the agency. But we keep those, the accounting of those separate.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
So again, I'm not going to go through every line item. You'll notice again, we're going through pages and pages and pages. Feel free to look at this over the next few days. Ask me any questions if something comes up. But there are a few things that I just want to point out. At the top of the next page, we talk a lot about provisos. A proviso is anything in this bill that says provided that. So one of the things you'll see a lot is a paragraph that says any unencumbered balance of whatever the fund is that it comes under. This one I have highlighted is the Cheyenne Bottoms account. Anything in excess of $100 as of the end of the fiscal year is hereby reappropriated. So what that means is in the state general fund account, if they don't spend it all over $100, it can reappropriate. Now, I'm going to show you here on the next page or two, it may not reappropriate because it can be taken. And I'm going to show you what that looks like.
Shirley, sorry. Yes. So would that be reappropriated to something else in the same year, or would that be saved and reappropriated for the next year?
The year is over, so it reappropriates into the next fiscal year.
For this particular account?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good question. And then you'll notice right under that, we have a subsection B. So again, like I mentioned before, everything that's in the A are state general fund accounts. And then in B, you'll see these are called special revenue funds. And for the universities, these are revenue that come in from other sources. And you'll notice with the universities, there are a lot of special revenues. And you'll also notice that these say no limit. So what that means is any dollar that comes in, they can expend that year. But I will also note that they don't. They always, almost always, save some of that money back and don't spend them down to nothing, just to make sure that they have money in the account in case at the next year they need that money. And I'll give you the example of tuition. General fees fund is in here, and general fees fund is tuition. So if they were to spend everything they had, and then they kept their budget the same, but they had fewer students, so the next year they have less revenue coming in, then there's a larger alteration to the budget. So they always have additional money. They don't spend every dime. Whereas with the state general fund, they almost always do, unless it reappropriates. So again, there's 2 pages of special revenue funds, and at the very bottom of page 114, you'll notice, and this will be different for each agency, but there could be additional subsections. You'll notice this subsection C. This is directing accounts and reports to move some money from the general fee fund to the Federal Perkins Loan Fund. So each agency could have different accounting things that have to be in an appropriation bill in order to move money around. So that's just an example of one of those.
And the ones that have no limit, that would be up to, in our case, each individual university gets to decide what they're going to do if they have an excess of 100, if they have over, no, they have no limit, but if they save some back, that's each university's prerogative to do what they want to do, not.
That's their own accounting.
Okay.
However they want to manage that money.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll notice the next section is section 101, which is the state, Kansas State University. Again, there are going to be, this is the, again, the final bill of the year. So this first section A is actually the supplemental bill that was added to the mega bill. That first section A, you'll notice the year ending June 30, 2021. So that was the current year from last year. The legislature added $160,080 to Polytechnic. And then you'll notice the B, the C, and the D. At the very end of that paragraph, it says, this sum is hereby lapsed. This is what it's going to look like if the governor or the legislature lapses a reappropriation, because that's what those were. Those were reappropriations that the governor lapsed, or in essence did not allow to reappropriate.
Okay, anyone have any questions?
And the other aspect to that is, you'll notice the beginning of the paragraph, when you're looking at last year's bill, it says on the effective date of this act, of the money that was appropriated from the fiscal year, and it will tell you where it is in the session laws, because it's from last year's bill. So it's section 82, subsection A of chapter 5 of the 2020 session laws. So that's why you know it's a supplemental, because you're going back to last year's bill and you're taking some of the money back. The mega portion of Kansas State University on page 116, I just highlighted. Again, this is a proviso, and you'll notice it takes the entire page. You'll notice this in each university. This is their restricted fees fund, and this will tell you what revenue comes into the restricted fees fund, because if it's not in the appropriation bill, then that money cannot be saved into the restricted fees. So you have an entire page of all the different fees they collect that's part of the restricted fees fund.
Sorry, what page are you on now?
116.
Okay,
I have a little highlighted section that says the restricted fees shall be limited to receipts from the following accounts. And you'll notice that list is an entire page.
could we go back just 1 second?
Sure.
On the previous page, Kansas State University, the top part is the supplemental, and we know because of the dates that are in there. That's different than omnibus, supplemental.
Omnibus is technically, and Jill may correct me here, omnibus is a point in time during session. Supplemental deals with a fiscal year. Mega deals with a fiscal year. Omnibus is a type of bill that collectively we put together because of the time of year session is. Omnibus is a session time period versus the fiscal year we're in specifically. Jill, did I butcher that terribly?
It sounded good to me, Jill.
The only thing that I might add is, I think if you can think about it as three, or there is three things, and they could actually be three different bills. There could be a supplemental bill that passes in January. There could be the mega bill that passes in April, and then your omnibus bill would pass in May. And sometimes just because of how the legislature works, sometimes that's just one bill, and supplemental, mega, and all your omnibus issues are put into one bill at omnibus. And so it just depends on the session and what the legislature desires to do.
Good, that's helpful, both of you. Any questions? Thank you.
And again, I'm just going through parts and pieces. So the next highlighted section I have is on page 118, where we're looking at Kansas State University Extension Systems and Agricultural Research Programs, which we refer to as Esarp. The one section that I wanted to point out there is subsection D. This was a legislative amendment that was put in. This is one of those that it's technically a policy change, but because this is in an appropriation bill, we put in language that says no monies appropriated from that fund by that university or by that agency can be expended on this specific item. And I also want to point out, this actually was vetoed by the governor, so it was taken out.
Jill?
If I could just interrupt, I mean, to me, this is a good example of something that we can draft that says no monies can be spent on this. And let's just like ignore what it was saying not to spend it on, to not focus on this. But there are times when you as legislators want a policy of, I don't want the agency to spend any money on X. And so this is just a good example of you guys, us drafting to implement your policy that no money is appropriated from the state general fund or any special revenue fund for, in this example, K-State, Esarp shall be expended for. And so we're just saying you can't expend it on. Now, if I could just like digress here momentarily to go back to the very first page of it and look at the example from subsection C of the Historical Society. I know this isn't your guys' bailiwick, but this is an example where we say the agency shall expend money to do X. And in this instance, we say expenditures shall be made to fix admission fees at Constitutional Hall in Lecompton. So we can do both things in an appropriation bill for an agency for a specific fiscal year. Our first example was you cannot spend money on it. This one, you're required to spend money on it. And there is a difference between shall and may. When we want you to spend money on it, we will say shall. When you, as the legislature, have told the revisor's office, Our policy is they shall spend the money on that. We will put shall, and there's some examples of you may expend money on that. And so it's may in the bill, but those are the things to look for. Sometimes it'll say, no state agency shall expend funds, and that means no. And some shall expend, an agency shall expend money, like in this Lecompton Constitutional Hall example.
And if I could ask a question, how is that different than like adding the proviso? You know, I noticed these don't say provided that. So how, as legislators, how would we know when we should put in shall or shall not versus putting in a proviso?
So you would be telling me or one of the other revisors what you want to do. And so we would be asking you key questions, and then we would draft based on this. So this example of C for the Historical Society, what we're saying, since this crosses all state general fund accounts and all special revenue funds of the Historical Society, we would draft it like a subsection, because we're not identifying a specific state general fund account, and we're not specifying a specific special revenue fund. We're saying all the money you got, and you know, it's a gross or gross overization, because, you know, how much is it really going to cost to implement this, to charge those monies? You know, maybe the first time you set it up, $10,000, you know, maybe, but, you know, since this is an ongoing one, they really wouldn't be spending that much money, but they could spend it out of whatever, what you're saying there is they can spend it out of whatever account they wanted or whatever special revenue fund they could use that money for.
So a proviso language would be specific under a specific account. So you would say, provided, we're going to give you this much money in this line item, provided that you spend it a certain way or you do something special with it. So it's just that, a proviso is just for that one account that it's under.
Or special revenue fund.
Subsection, it's going to be multiple. And I think the good thing on going over all of this is it kind of gives you an idea of some of the amendments that you can put together. And Jill and I work very closely together, especially on proviso language. And again, where it goes in the bill and how it looks, and depending on what you want, what your idea is in your amendments. But I'm going to show you kind of some of these, and this is how they go into the bill. Okay, so we looked at K-State, we looked at Esarp. You've got a section in there for K-State veterinary medicine. I don't really have anything called out here, but you'll notice they have a few different state general fund accounts, and then you get into subsection B that gets into the no limit, the special revenue fund accounts. You've got Emporia State on page 121. Again, subsection A, they've got 3 different state general fund accounts and then special revenue fund accounts. Pittsburgh State on page 123. This one I want to talk about a little bit because this is actually something that House Appropriations did last year, and so I'm going to kind of walk through this one. Pittsburgh State, the supplemental portion of the bill is right in the middle of page 123, and you'll see a subsection A and a subsection B. These were reappropriations that the governor lapsed. And I don't know if you'll remember last year in House Appropriations, the president of Pittsburgh State came in and said, I really needed that money to reappropriate because we were going to use it to match some federal grant that we received, so we'd like you to put it back in. Well, that line item under subsection B on the last line where it says $11,610, The governor's recommendation when that bill first came out, that number was $411,610. And so what I did in marking up the bill was I struck that number and reduced it by the 400,000, giving them the $400,000 back. And that's in essence how they got the money back, is I changed that number. So again, if an agency, and I know this didn't happen this year, is that on reappropriation, but if an agency were to come in and say, I wish you hadn't taken that money, put it back in. That's how we do it. We just changed the number back and we gave them back the $400,000.
And so Shirley, that was an easy way to put it back in, but that was at the direction of the legislature.
Correct.
Yeah. Just making sure you weren't
wasn't
just,
gonna go
doing
back
hocus
in any
pocus,
other
Shirley.
way.
I know, I'm just, yeah, just making that clear. Yep, Jill. Mhm.
Could but I could clarify. So that was the governor's recommendation. You all looked at it and decided, after hearing testimony, that you wanted that number to be $11,000 instead of $411,000. So where you first saw that 411 is the governor's bill and their recommendation. Thank you.
And again, if I'll go back to the yellow sheet, one of the documents we do is called the shorthand. It's down at the bottom of the first page. The shorthand is any change from the governor's recommendation. So there would be a line item under Pittsburgh State in the shorthand that would say, add $400,000, because that was the amendment that we got from House Appropriations to add 400. Now, that doesn't mean I'm adding it to the bill, because all I did was take the 400,000 out of the lapse. But the legislature made a change from the governor's recommendation to add 400 back in, and that would be in the shorthand. So that's another thing. You can always look at the shorthand and see what are all the changes that we, the legislature, made from the governor's recommendation. And they will have provisos in there as well. They'll say add language to whatever you want that language to do.
And just as a reminder, do we get all of these documents like on our desk in the house, or do we ask for each one specifically, or how do we see these documents?
So the packet I put together is a very typical packet of multicolored documents that will be on your desk on the floor when you're about to work a budget bill. Now, the other thing, if you're in House Appropriations or Senate Ways and Means, you get these documents as the bill changes, and we're doing working bills or having bill, working the bill. And many times, House Appropriations or Senate Ways and Means will say, tell us where we're at. And then we will create a profile of here's what the governor rec was, and here are the changes you made, so here's the new profile of where you're at so far. So as we go through the bill, then we get to the University of Kansas on page 125. At the top of page 126, and this kind of gets to what Jill was talking about with the Historical Society, I get a request every year or every other year from a particular senator about the geologic survey line item. And it is a request to look at seismic surveys specifically. So what they said, and this was about 5 years ago, they said, I want to put in an amendment to add, and I don't remember if it was 100,000, see, that, give or take a zero or something. I want to put in $100,000 under geological survey, but I want them to specifically spend it on seismic surveys. Oh, and it's in there, $100,000, if I'd have read the bill. So you could do that if there was already a sub-account of something specific, like the Emporia Reading Program, and you say, I want to put in $50,000 for a very specific reading program, you could put it under that line item with a proviso that says, of the total amount, I want them to spend $50,000 on this specific thing. So that's what that would look like. And again, that's something that I look at every year, and I get asked every year, is that money there? Is that proviso still there? Because we have to go through the bill, and this is one of my jobs. I have to know of those provisos, should it carry forward every year, or should I have deleted it? Anytime the governor's recommendation comes out, I have to go through and say, nope, that was just for that 1 year, take it out. So this would be something, if you wanted to look at a specific line item, even if it was the operating line item, and say, add $50,000 for something very specific, you do it as a proviso under that line, and you say, spend not less than $100,000 on seismic surveys. So again, this gives you some ideas of what you can do. One of the things we talked about last year was the continuation of the Can Grow Engineering Fund. I don't know if y'all remember that, but you elongated it another 10 years. On the top of page 128, you will see, and this is one of the special revenue funds under the University of Kansas, you'll see that the second fund there is the Can Grow Engineering Fund. That fund can also be found in K-State's special revenue funds and Wichita State special revenue funds. Here's where my job gets real interesting. You'll notice that's a no-limit fund. But in the bill, there's a very specific amount appropriated to each one of those universities. It's in the Department of Commerce budget. So I have to go to, every year I have to go to the Department of Commerce budget and make sure they get their money. But in their budget, it's a no-limit fund because Department of Commerce transfers it over. So those are some of the things that are in budgets that you all don't have to worry about. That's what I get paid the big bucks for. So there could be money in other agencies that have to do with higher education, and I just have to make sure everything's in the right place for it to work. Also, some of the universities have the special appropriated funds, like the Economic Development Initiative Fund or the State Water Plan Fund. If you look at subsection D there, this is water plan fund money for the geological survey, and that's separated out different from the subsection A, which is State General Fund, or subsection B, Special Revenue Funds. Usually they're at the end of the agency's list, the special appropriated funds. So again, I have to check and make sure that gets put in every year. Then you have a couple of sections for the University of Kansas Medical Center. Again, I've kind of gone over most of these. I don't have anything special in there, sorry. Wichita State University. But I will spend a little bit of time on the State Board of Regents. This is the largest budget that I have as far as how many pages it takes up. You'll notice the budget year starts on the top of page 134. some of the funds that we talk a lot about in the, whether it's House Appropriations or Senate Ways and Means or these budget committees, down at the bottom of the page is the comprehensive grant program. That's the one, I'll remind you, about half of that goes to the independent and private colleges. And again, that was raised last year, that amount. On the middle of the next page, 135, you'll see the National Guard Scholarship. We will talk a little bit more. We will talk a little bit more about that one this year because there was an enhancement request from the Adjutant General on that. So we'll talk about that money and how much that will be. At the bottom of that list, you'll see the Municipal University Operating Grant. That's Washburn. So if we ever want to look and see how much money the state's giving to Washburn, it's Municipal Operating Grant. And again, sometimes the legislature adds money to that program. They did have an enhancement this year. We talk a lot about the tiered and non-tiered. So right underneath the Municipal Operating Grant, we've got the tiered, and then the next fund on the next page, 136, is the non-tiered. Adam Prophet talked about those this morning. The governor put more money in on those. However, we still have a gap. We're still going to talk about the gap. We didn't totally fill up the gap, so we'll talk about that.
And to remind, the tiered is the technical and the non-tiered is the
non-tiered is
gen ed.
Yes. And again, you'll notice there's pages and pages of scholarships and different funds that are in the Board of Regents. At the very bottom of page 139, again, we're getting to the end of this agency's section. You'll notice there's subsection E, which talks about the Economic Development Initiative Fund. And there's, I think, 3 line items there. There's some capital outlay. There's some technology innovation and internship program, and then EPSCOR, which is part of their research. But that all comes from EDIF, and so those are specific and separate from the other accounts. So that ends the mega bill until we get to the back, which is where capital improvements are. So if we go to page 196, there's not a lot to talk about. You'll notice there's a lot of different specific project named funds that they'll put money into, where there'll be no limit, or debt service funds for capital improvements. But I do want to talk about subsection B under Emporia State. And you will notice this paragraph is in every one of the universities. And this talks about rehab and repair, the Americas with Disability Act compliance projects, state fire marshal code compliance projects, and improvements to classroom projects. That means it's the educational building fund. We had this big convoluted name, but that's the educational building fund. And there's a proviso at the bottom of that. This subsection shall not apply to unencumbered balances of any account of the educational building fund of the above agency that was first appropriated in the fiscal year commencing July of 2020. Now you'll notice that the sentence at the beginning of that paragraph is, this is for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2022. All that whole thing means is each university has 2 years to expend each year's educational building fund. So they can carry it forward. And you'll see that under each agency because they all get educational building fund. And then the only thing I'll talk a little bit about on the page 19 of the Omnibus memo, which, well, actually, I've got page 201, the State Board of Regents. One of the things the legislature did last year is we moved that 10.3 million around, and we ended up putting it in capital improvements, and it got vetoed. Yes, sir.
Representative Riley.
Madam Chair, question on that, and it's, again, you did a great job explaining the no limit, but in the case of the page 196 that you were just covering, and those, they were all no limits. So funding-wise, what is that saying that on, specifically on these building projects, that if someone gives some money for a memorial or something to that university, there's no limit as far as repairs, or I'm not quite sure why the no limit again on these building projects.
These would be funds that they created specific for a building project. They could use their general fees fund, they could use their, well, now foundation isn't going to be in the bill because that's foundation money. That's not considered state money. No, because especially for building projects, they use numerous different funds to, unless, only if it's state money. If somebody gave $70,000 and said, build the business school, that's going to be in the endowment or the foundation, and it's not going to be represented here.
Chair. So why don't this say Twin Towers Housing Project, $350,000 instead of no limit?
Well, because then you would be appropriating in a specific amount for a specific building, whereas they're using different funds. They're using other no-limit funds into a specific account for a specific building.
I think that's kind of what I was saying, but okay.
If it's a specific dollar amount, you can't spend over that dollar amount. And so, especially with capital improvement projects, because prices change, everything changes, they make a specific account for a specific project and fund it through there, but to put a specific dollar amount with it, we'd be constantly changing that dollar amount because it's in the bill. You'd be limiting to that expenditure, yeah.
Representative Amix.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shirley, so then when we talk about no limit, and something that you just said, just correct for me, is it no limit on the amount of dollars, or is it no limit on the amount of funds that can be used to fund whatever's here?
The appropriation bill is for expenditures.
Okay. That's what I needed.
Yeah.
Representative Wassinger.
In response to what Representative Riley was talking about, in instances, we could do a proviso if we felt like we wanted to limit any part of the state funds. We could do a, provided, however, is that correct? I'm wondering if that's part of what you were asking.
You can limit no-limit funds. If the legislature were to want to limit no-limit funds, we would have to put a dollar amount into.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Shirley, if I'm not mistaken, when you explained that before, it's saying there's been a certain amount of money, it's a special fund. There's no limit, it's already a fund. There's no limit how much of this particular amount you may spend.
You could have
Is
a
that right?
fund
Yeah,
that the revenue is, there's different revenue sources going into the fund, and it's not limiting how much of that, of those revenue sources you can expend. This is, this talks about expenditures. So you could have a $1 billion fund and spend 100,000 out of the fund and have an ending balance. And it's up to their accountants and their CFO to make sure they don't overspend these accounts to where they come down to where they have no money in them. Because not talking about the specific capital improvement funds, but when you're talking about tuition or general fees, those are operating expenditures for the university. They don't want to overexpend those.
so I think just seeing like no limit means, hey, this, you can spend as much as you want. It's not as much as you want in the huge universe, it's as much as you want in this already defined fund.
For the capital improvements, yes, absolutely.
Okay, we can talk more about it. We'll talk more about it later.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Well, and that's why I'm trying to kind of introduce you to how we put these bills together so that whether I'm answering questions or you ask specific questions of the universities of how they manage their accounts, it would be a plausible question.
Yeah.
And why they don't want to overspend them, even though we're not going to limit them to certain expenditures.
Okay, thank you.
The last thing I just wanted to talk about is the Omnibus Bill, page 19, the University Medical Center, University of Kansas Medical Center. This was one that was put in last year, subsection A, for $500,000 for the Midwest stem cell. And again, that was vetoed by the governor.
Was that put in during conference committee or what, who put, where?
It was put in by the Senate. It was part of the omnibus memo. It was put in at omnibus by the Senate. Mm-hmm. I had to stop and remember how that one went.
Okay, thank you.
So that just gives you an idea of what an appropriation bill looks like, some of the things that you can do to change it, or some of the amendments. And what, again, we can talk about this for the next 2 or 3 weeks, what questions you have, what ideas you have before we start getting into the budgets.
Yep. So, yeah, I just want to reiterate that the reason we're doing this is we sit on a budget committee. It's way different than if y'all sit on insurance or judiciary. And we've to be better informed, and our budget committee will help us be better legislators. And so that's why we want to make sure we understand. So we'll be kind of continuing the conversation on Tuesday at our meeting, and then Wednesday, Thursday, we will, I believe, Blake Flanders is coming in to talk to us specifically about the federal money that has come in to the state and to the Board of Regents and the Regent schools.
One thing, on Wednesday, I'm going to bring in notebooks. You each get a performance-based budget notebook, and I will leave it to the chair to decide what discussions we will have on those.
Okay. Yep. Okay, and so you all let me know or let Shirley know or John know if you have specific questions that you would like answered on Tuesday as we kind of continue this conversation. Also, don't forget to let me know if you have questions that you would like asked of the Regent schools when we get to their presentations. Okay, is there anything else of anybody? Okay, then we're adjourned. Shirley, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.